In the opening minute of the subversive 2001 comedic masterpiece, Freddy Got Fingered, we are immediately challenged with 3 striking cartoon drawings from the protagonist Gord's portfolio. To contrast with the more refined Zebras in America that ultimately wins Gord his success, these cartoons are characterized as nonsensical garbage. However, the auteur's deliberate choice to open the film with these cartoons' exhibition and their marked specificity belie this simple assessment. In truth, these tableaux are a multifaceted, lustrous, hypnotic prism through which we might glimpse the true majesty within Freddy Got Fingered. To begin, permit me to describe the self-contained vignettes in this cartoon triad. First, a cat. A vigilante cat dubbed X-Ray Cat uses his superpower to see a crime through a wooden door. Second, a banana applies for a job as a telephone repairman. The boss on the other side of the desk hires the banana with a gleeful handshake. Third, a beaver verbally berates another, practically identical beaver, denouncing it as a stupid beaver. The first layer, the film's central conflict. The lanky X-Ray Cat is a clear representation of Gord. The first line of the film is Gord narrating, "Hi, hi, 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 I'm X-Ray Cat." Reflecting his creator, X-Ray Cat is a vigilante who, though he saves the day, is hated by the police and the establishment for playing outside their rules. The shouting beaver can easily be understood as a representation of Gord's abusive father Jim, portrayed here by the inimitable Rip Torn. The identical appearances of the two beavers parallel the similarity between father and son, and the yelling motif is seen in Gord's other illustrations of his father and himself. Later in the film, Gord watches a scene from television's Leave It to Beaver, where a father lectures his sons and sends one of them to his room after a dinner-time dispute, echoing an episode with Gord's own parents. Further, Gord and his family live in Oregon, the state animal of which is, as you know, the beaver. Beavers, idiomatically, represent industriousness. Busy as a beaver, as they say. And if the one beaver is to be seen shouting at the other, deeming him a stupid beaver, it should be understood as the second beaver failing to live up to the beaver work ethic. The central conflict of the film is a generational clash between a father who wants his son to get a job and make him proud, and a son who pursues his own dreams which are inscrutable to his father. The middle drawing, the bridge between Gord's X-Ray Cat and Jim's shouting beaver, represents the two alternative resolutions to this tension. From the father's perspective, the son with his ridiculous doodles is an embarrassment who should simply surrender, follow in his father's footsteps, and get a job. Any mundane job at all, whether it is as a repairman or as an artisan of cheese sandwiches. The boss character can therefore be seen, secondarily to the beaver, as a stand-in for the father. he is ecstatic with the banana's employment, without any consideration of the job's fit. For what job is particularly well suited to a banana? The fulfillment for the banana, the son in this scenario, ought to be the same regardless of the job, and any further aspirations are irrelevant. All that should matter is the approval and pride of the father figure. If, however, we identify with Gord, the son, we know the importance of tasting the fruits of one's labor. The reason, obvious in retrospect, that the job seeker is represented here by a banana. We can see that the banana has set its sights on a specific occupation. It is following its dream. The boss character evolves from an initial skepticism to an understanding and affectionate embrace of the banana's hand. For a satisfactory resolution, it is not the banana, the son, who must change. It is the boss, the father. The job itself, telephone repairman, is a highly relevant detail as well. Communication between Gord and Jim is profoundly broken, preventing any progress in their relationship. When Gord eventually breaks through to his father in the film's climax, Jim quickly reconciles with him and becomes proud of him on Gord's own terms. Second layer, dialectics. Thus far, we have understood the cartoon triad as a succinct but surface-level summary of the film's plot. It is perhaps better recognized as an Hegelian dialectic, a philosophical discourse between contradictory positions to find a deeper truth. We explore a thesis until its flaws make it untenable. It is then replaced with its antithesis until that too crumbles. The third stage resolves the dilemma with a synthesis of opposites. Here, the thesis comes in the form of the X-Ray Cat cartoon. Two characters, the X-Ray Cat and the human criminal, separated by a barrier, the wooden door. X-Ray Cat can see through this wooden door while the criminal cannot. And thus, the vigilante cat takes the dominant position in the dyad. This stage of the dialectic is embodied in Gord's idealistic rejection of his father's authority and vilification of his values as greedy materialism. Gord abandons his home in Portland, asserting himself upon the world, confidently seizing it by the to pursue his artistic aspirations as an animator. Having discarded his father's work ethic, he ignores the obstacles to succeeding in Hollywood and flouts every rule, arrogantly expecting the studio head, Dave Davidson, to immediately give him his own show. Dave Davidson understandably rejects this overture. Gord's self-image is shattered by the realities of the natural order, sending him to the brink of destruction. The pendulum then swings to the antithesis, the banana job interview. Again, the duo of characters is separated by a wooden barrier, the boss's desk. Gord has transitioned from the superhero cat to an egoless banana, occupying the submissive position to the dominant human character. We see this play out in the narrative as Gord prostrates himself in humility and returns home to his family in Portland. He accepts a more passive outlook, relinquishes his independence, and ostensibly submits to his father's authority. While this does afford Gord the time and opportunity to develop his artistry, he ultimately stifles under his father's dominion. The inevitable result is his total surrender and return to a job assembling cheese sandwiches, where he falls into an even deeper despair. A synthesis emerges with the third cartoon. The two characters are now of the same species, Castor canadensis, the North American beaver, a destroyer of wood. And the wooden barrier is no more, you notice. There is no more dominance and no more submission here. The two are equals, peers, and partners, reflections of each other. Gord's ultimate success comes when he sells a cartoon to Dave Davidson called Zebras in America, about a family of zebra centaurs, themselves syntheses, fusions of human and beast, of Gord's future and past, of dreams and of reality. Independence unguided is adrift. Obedience without aspiration is captive. Interestingly, we glimpse this very same synthesis in a supplementary cartoon that Gord shows to Dave Davidson. X-ray cat observing a balloon carrying a banana and a bag of eyeballs on a string. The banana is the focused labor demanded by Gord's father, and the sack of eyeballs, baboon eyeballs soaked in a mystery sauce, is the sublime vision that Gord chases. Together they rise with the balloon, the artistic elevation that Dave Davidson seeks. Now, while this reading is certainly complete unto itself, there is something strangely unsatisfying about it, isn't there? It is trite and almost too straightforward. Before, I dubbed beavers as destroyers of wood to explain the absence of a wooden barrier in the final cartoon. However, anyone who knows anything about beavers would tell us that not only do beavers chew through wood, they use that very wood to erect dams, literal barriers to tame the flow of rivers and streams, to beat them into submission. There seems to be a paradox emerging, and in dialectics, a paradox must be resolved. The third layer, the backwards man. Tom Green is far from careless. He would never have used the beaver symbolism without being keenly aware of the double entendre of the wood paradox. Therefore, it now falls to us to understand what it is that he is telling us. Midway through the film, Gord bedrapes himself in his father's suit, contemplates himself in a mirror, and repeats a mantra, identifying himself as the backwards man. This is a thematically potent scene, and it cannot be ignored. If we revisit the cartoon triad from the perspective of this backwards man, perusing it in reverse, another compelling interpretation of Freddy Got Fingered promptly emerges. The first stage of the dialectic now becomes the pair of beavers, two undifferentiated consciousnesses engaged in unfocused hostility. In the second stage, the banana job interview, the struggle is resolved, and an armistice reached as a differentiation occurs in the form of a segregating wooden desk, presumably built by the beavers. One of the consciousnesses submits to the other and becomes a subservient banana, while the dominant consciousness forms its identity as the human boss. In the third stage, a reversal transpires as the submissive subhuman consciousness, becoming the X-ray cat, sees through the barrier and recognizes the truth of the power dynamic and its own agency therein, ultimately rebelling against the exploitative human consciousness. This is as clear an adaptation as I've ever seen of the classic master-slave dialectic from Georg Hegel's The Phenomenology of Spirit. In Freddy Got Fingered, the dominant personality, the master is Rip Torn's Jim Brody. He derives his self-worth from being the patriarch of the family. His son's value to him is solely as investments, as sources of pride to reflect his influence and identity back at him and reaffirm his position of power. The sons, Gord and Freddy, are made to believe his pride is of value to them. But this is not so. The younger son, Freddy, is presented as the more mature of the two. He has a steady job working at a bank and lectures his older brother Gord as their father's surrogate. Freddy would appear to be the ideal son by Jim's standards, yet Jim thoroughly ignores him throughout the film. The parents give Gord a LeBaron with a #1 son license plate, yet Freddy doesn't get a LeBaron, does he? Don't see a LeBaron for Freddy. And though Freddy presents himself as the more grown-up of the two brothers, he finds himself at best in the same situation as Gord. His job at the bank has not afforded him the promised independence of adulthood, as he still spends all of his time at his parents' house for meals and to watch TV. Gord, by contrast, comes to understand that he has the true power through defiance of his authoritarian father. In the backwards man scene, dressed as a parody of his father, Gord sees clearly that the root of Jim's tyranny is his vanity and desperation for affirmation, and he commits thereafter to negating his father at every step, dismantling piece by piece his familial relationships and depriving him of his last sources of respect and pride and exposing his utter weakness. Well, now Gord's rocket scientist girlfriend, Betty, in rejecting his gift of jewels, teaches him that enduring consciousness of oneself comes not from material gain or from power over others, but in the dedication towards one's passions and in the mutual recognition of human dignity. Thus, to complete the cycle, after annihilating his father's vanity once and for all and returning them both to their initial state as equal beavers, so to speak, Gord affirms his and his father's humanities within a light of mutual understanding, where neither is dependent, yet each, paradoxically, buttresses the other. Few scenes are as profoundly beautiful. The fourth layer, the three wise monkeys. X-ray cat, who watches crimes through wooden doors. The banana, eager to repair non-functioning telephones. The beaver, who shouts at his fellow beaver, thoroughly berating him. We have studied these characters, both as narrative and as dialectic. Now, let us finally consider them as pieces coexisting within a simultaneous whole. What is its message, I wonder? Sight, sound, and speech. The monkeys, Mizaru, Kikazaru, and Iwazaru, are the Japanese expressions of the ancient exhortations. See no evil, hear no evil, speak no evil. Their lesson is one of purity of thought and deed. For one who dwells among evil things cannot help but to be corrupted by them. Yet the triad has come to also represent the opposing message, that it is our moral duty to bear witness to evil and to speak out against it. To look away is to shirk this duty. The wisdom of the three monkeys has therefore been muddled across the ages. The X-ray cat, banana, beaver, triad suffers from no such ambiguity. Unequivocally, their message is on the side of moral responsibility, commanding us to watch, to listen, and to speak out. This is perhaps unsurprising, as the very title of the film, Freddy Got Fingered, is an accusation which Gord levels at his father in the second act. The literal truth of the alleged atrocity is arguable. Freddy vehemently denies his victimization at the fingers of his father, but this denial is paralleled by the young boy Andy's insistence on his own well-being after he is clearly obliterated by a propeller at the film's conclusion. Jim Brody is otherwise incontrovertibly a violent and abusive father. In the immediate aftermath of the allegation, the mise-en-scène literally points the finger at Jim, as if to tell him, "J'accuse." Regardless of how much credence we give the crime, we cannot ignore its symbolic importance. Now, the metaphor is highly objectionable and deeply offensive, to say the least. Yet its indisputable crassness shocks us into taking notice. There can be no hiding of our eyes and ears, nor a silencing of our revulsion. We must move past the wise monkeys and commit totally to the path of the cat, banana, and beaver. Despite his few scenes, the character of Freddy is pivotal. We must endeavor to understand the precise wrong that his father has perpetrated upon him. Before Freddy is taken into protective custody, he is sitting in his parents' living room watching television. Beside the television set, there sit a cat sculpture on one side and a decorative apple on the other. A cat and a piece of fruit, instructing us to open our eyes and our ears and take note of the evil at hand. But where is the beaver who gives voice to the injustice? Well, we cannot expect the auteur, Tom Green, to hold our hands the entire way, now can we? I puzzled over this very question for many weeks. You see, it is not to be a literal beaver. The cartoon beaver, after all, is shouting at his beaver twin. Now, there is also a prominent photograph of Gord from high school beside the television, and it was Gord who earlier berated his brother Freddy, imploring him towards introspection. The photograph itself evidences Gord's growth out of childhood, while diagnosing Freddy's lack thereof. As I alluded to before, although Freddy is a 25-year-old man with a steady job at the bank, he has not attained any independence. Here he sits in his childhood living room watching television on a sofa. After being taken to the institute, he sits surrounded by children. watching television on another sofa, revealing the truth of his stunted development. He remains there for the rest of the film, and nobody cares. This regression, though, is precisely what the father, Jim Brody, wants for both of his sons. He has conflated their attainment of adulthood with subservience to his authoritarian will. He interprets as infantile any expression of independent thought, hobbies, creativity, even and especially choosing what food to eat. Entire theses could be written on the many ratings of the food of Freddy Got Fingered, but I only want to mention its role as a flashpoint in the power dynamics between father and sons. It is a symbol both of oppression and of emancipation. Freddy returns to his parents' home for meals, for he has no will of his own. By contrast, as Gord struggles for independence, he repeatedly asserts his right to eat chicken burgers in defiance of his father's ultimatums. Gord flees from soul-crushing jobs making cheese sandwiches. The means of his liberation, meaning his creativity, are directly tied to food, in an iconic scene wherein he ties a sausage to each of his fingers while drawing and composing music on an electric piano. Fingers. We are back to fingers, it seems. The direct implements of a person's power. Jim seizes the sausage strings and yanks Gord to his feet, crucifying him through his fingers as he smashes his musical instrument. Later, when Dave Davidson considers Gord's latest cartoon pitch, Jim bursts into the office and accuses Dave Davidson of brainwashing his son and leading him to sit with his fingers up his bum. Up his bum. A direct reference to the fingering of which he himself has been accused. But here we can recognize it for what it truly is, a form of puppetry. Jim is apoplectic that someone has shown Gord that he can seize control over himself. He can be free and independent, the master of his own destiny, his own fingerer, so to speak. Thus, when Gord accuses Jim of fingering Freddy, it is now obvious that he is calling our attention to Freddy's complete servility and loss of self. He is a puppet. What about Freddy's fingers, you ask? Well, we see early on in the film that he has willingly twisted them together in a time-honored ritual symbolizing one's impotent surrender to fate, or to luck, or to chance, or to any other outside force besides one's own agency. Cross our fingers and hope for an identity-squelching jobby, Freddy. Finally, to revisit the large finger in the background behind Jim. It certainly points at him accusingly, but observe where it points precisely. His bum. Remember that this immediately follows his son Freddy being taken from him, and his wife Julie leaving him. Gord has now destroyed him at this point, stripped him of the last vestiges of his power. He is adrift and intoxicated in a world beyond his control. He is himself being fingered by the hand of fate, or by the hand of God, perhaps. Some concluding thoughts. I hope I have convinced you of the artistic merit of the 3 cartoons from Gord's portfolio. But I should remind you that these interpretations exist within the context of the entire film Freddy Got Fingered. Dave Davidson lacks that perspective through no fault of his own, being merely a character in said film. Thus he can hardly be blamed for rejecting Gord's pitch and besmirching his creativity. No one would watch these cartoons. Zebras in America, on the other hand, is clearly the superior project, though it offers little to us, the outside audience, in the way of literary value, as it is far too on the nose with its allegory.
It's crazy! Listen to my hooves!